I adjusted the hem of my black cocktail dress, smoothing out invisible wrinkles as I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom at the Westbrook Hotel. All around me, executives from Harrison and Price International mingled, their laughter echoing off marble floors and crystal chandeliers. 20 years I'd attended this annual company gala, but tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't just Olivia Barrett, executive assistant to CEO Alexander Price. Tonight, I was the woman who owned their future. They just didn't know it yet. Olivia. Alexander's voice boomed across the room. Come here, darling. Tell everyone your little story. I turned slowly, maintaining the same pleasant, unassuming smile I perfected over 2 decades of managing his calendar, his meetings, and his secrets. Alexander stood with a group of board members, his face flushed from too much expensive scotch. She's been with the company forever, he announced as I approached. Started as a temp, right, Olivia? 23 years ago, I confirmed quietly. And now look at her, he gestured expansively. Executive assistant to the CEO. It's like a fairy tale. The group chuckled indulgently. I noticed Richard Cooper, our CFO, checking his watch. He'd never approved of Alexander's tendency to parade me around at company events like some sort of success story mascot. Tell them about your investment, Alexander prodded, his voice carrying just a bit too far. The one that made you a millionaire. Ah, there it was. The real reason he called me over. 3 months ago, I'd purchased a vacation home in the Hamptons. The news had spread through the office like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know how a secretary, even an executive secretary, could afford such a purchase. Just lucky timing in the market, I said modestly. Lucky. Alexander laughed. See, she's just a secretary who got lucky. Probably read some hot tip in one of those women's magazines. More laughter. Even Richard Cooper cracked a smile. What's important, Alexander continued, clapping a hand on my shoulder, is that she knows her place. Don't you, Olivia? I met his eyes steadily. I always have, Alexander. He missed the edge in my voice, but I saw Richard Cooper's smile fade slightly. He was sharper than the others, always had been. Maybe that's why he'd been the only one to notice when I'd started buying company shares 7 years ago. Small amounts at first, nothing to raise alarms. A few hundred shares here, 1,000 there. Always through different brokers, different accounts. I'd learned about hiding paper trails from the best. I'd been covering Alexander's tracks for years after all. Another drink, Olivia? Alexander offered, already turning away, dismissing me from his little court. No thank you, I replied. I should check on the catering. He waved me off, already launching into another story. I retreated to my corner, pulling out my phone. A message from my broker glowed on the screen. Final transfer complete. Congratulations, Ms. Barrett. You now own 51% of Harrison and Price International. I allowed myself a small smile. 7 years of careful planning. 7 years of reinvesting every penny, leveraging every bit of market intelligence I'd gleaned from typing Alexander's emails, sitting in on his calls, organizing his meetings. The same access he'd taken for granted had given me everything I needed to build my position. Quite a party, a quiet voice said beside me. I turned to find Margaret Wells, our head of legal, studying me with curious eyes. You seem deep in thought. Just tired, I replied. It's been a long week. She nodded slowly. I imagine it has, especially with the Peterson merger falling apart. I kept my face carefully neutral. The Peterson deal had been Alexander's pet project for months. What no one knew was that I'd been the one to quietly tip off Peterson's board about Alexander's plans to strip their assets and lay off their entire research division. These things happen, I said mildly. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd always been too perceptive for her own good. You know, Olivia, I've been reviewing some interesting trading patterns lately. Large blocks of shares being bought through various shells and holding companies. Very sophisticated stuff. I met her gaze calmly. Sounds fascinating. It is, she agreed. Almost as fascinating as how a secretary managed to buy a $3 million beach house. Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew our attention. Janet Chin, head of our Asian operations, was arriving late, and she wasn't alone. With her was Marcus Peterson himself, CEO of Peterson Technologies. Alexander's face went pale. He started pushing through the crowd toward them. But Marcus held up a hand. Don't bother, Alexander, he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here to meet the person who really controls Harrison and Price now. Every head in the room turned, looking for some unknown power player. I felt Margaret stiffen beside me as realization dawned in her eyes. "It's you, isn't it?" she whispered. I handed her my empty champagne glass. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I believe I have a meeting to attend." As I walked across that ballroom floor, 2 decades of being underestimated, overlooked, and condescended to fell away with each step. The whispers started as people began to understand what was happening. By the time I reached Marcus Peterson, Alexander's face had moved past pale and straight into gray. "Miss Barrett," Marcus said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for warning us about the hostile takeover attempt. I believe we have much to discuss about a more equitable merger arrangement." "My pleasure," I replied, shaking his hand. "Shall we use the private dining room?" I had it prepared just in case. Alexander found his voice then. What is this? Olivia, what are you doing?" I turned to face him, dropping the deferential mask I'd worn for so long. "Taking my place, Alexander, just like you always said I should." The room erupted in chaos. Board members pulled out phones, frantically calling lawyers and brokers. Richard Cooper slumped against the bar, looking like he might be sick. And Alexander just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. In a way, he was. Margaret appeared at my elbow, her legal mind already racing ahead. "The quarterly board meeting is next week," she said quietly. "I assume you'll want to make some changes to the voting structure." I nodded. "Among other things, I think it's time Harrison and Price had some fresh perspectives in leadership." And Alexander. I glanced at my longtime boss, still frozen in shock. "I believe he's overdue for retirement. Don't worry, I'll write him a lovely recommendation letter. After all, I've been writing all his other correspondence for years." Marcus Peterson chuckled beside me. "Shall we discuss that merger?" "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the private dining room. "After you." As we walked away, I heard Alexander's voice, small and confused. But she's just the secretary." I paused at the dining room door, looking back at him one last time. "No, Alexander, I was never just a secretary. You just never bothered to look past the title." The door closed behind us with a soft click, leaving the chaos of the ballroom behind. 23 years of playing the perfect assistant, and in one night, everything had changed. Well, not everything. I still had to order the catering for next week's board meeting, but this time, I'd be sitting at the head of the table. As I took my seat across from Marcus Peterson, I pulled out my phone and sent one final message to my broker: "Begin phase 2. The real work was just beginning. After all, I hadn't spent 7 years building my position just to maintain the status quo. Harrison and Price was about to undergo some major changes. And this time, I wouldn't be taking the minutes. I'd be calling the shots. The morning after the gala, I arrived at Harrison and Price's headquarters at exactly 7:00 a.m., just as I had for the past 23 years. The security guard did a double take when I stepped out of a chauffeur-driven Mercedes instead of my usual modest sedan. "Morning, Miss Barrett," he stammered, quickly opening the door. Ma'am, Olivia is still fine, George," I said kindly. After all, he'd been the one who'd always saved me a parking spot close to the building on late nights when I was the last to leave, long after Alexander had gone home. The lobby was already buzzing with nervous energy. News travels fast in corporate America, and the events of last night's gala had spread like wildfire. Junior executives huddled in corners, whispering behind coffee cups. Administrative assistants traded wide-eyed looks as I passed. I walked to the executive elevator, the one I'd never been allowed to use despite managing the access list for 2 decades. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Same elegant blazer and pencil skirt I always wore, but today they were Channel instead of department store brands. Small changes, just enough to signal that the rules had shifted. Alexander's office, my office now, was dark when I arrived. His secretary Janet's desk was empty too. On any other Monday, I'd be at my old desk outside, preparing his schedule, screening his calls, making his coffee just the way he liked it. Instead, I used my key, the one he never knew I had, to unlock his door. The room still smelled of his cologne and stale cigar smoke. I walked to his desk, running my fingers along the polished mahogany. How many times had I stood here, taking notes while he held court. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Peterson, Wall Street Journal, running the story in 30 minutes. Ready? I smiled, settling into the leather chair. Ready. At 7:45 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before the markets opened, the story broke. Breaking. Harrison and Price International undergoes shocking leadership change. Secret majority shareholder revealed as CEO's former secretary. My phone exploded with notifications. First came the panicked texts from board members, then emails from shareholders, then calls from every major news outlet in the country. At 8 a.m. sharp, Alexander burst into the office, face red with rage. He stopped short when he saw me in his chair. "Get out," he snarled. "This is my office." I didn't move. "Actually, Alexander, this is the CEO's office, and according to the bylaws you never bothered to read carefully, the majority shareholder has the right to appoint the CEO. Would you like to see the paperwork?" "This is impossible," he spluttered. "You're nothing but a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," I cut in, my voice silk over steel. "They might be your last ones as an employee of this company." He deflated slightly, sinking into one of the visitor chairs, the same ones I'd selected years ago when we renovated the office. "How?" he whispered. "How did you do this?" I leaned forward, folding my hands on the desk. "Do you remember the Miller acquisition in 2016? He frowned. "Of course. One of our biggest deals." "Do you remember who found the discrepancy in their financials? The one that let us negotiate the price down by 40%? "I did," he said automatically. I raised an eyebrow. "No, Alexander. I did. Just like I found the hidden value in their Asian subsidiaries that tripled our return on investment. Just like I spotted the patent infringement in their European operations that you used to pressure their board." Understanding began to dawn in his eyes. "For 23 years, I continued, I've watched you take credit for other people's work. I've covered up your mistakes, fixed your errors, and made you look brilliant. And every step of the way, I was learning. About business, about strategy, about power." "But the shares," he started. "Remember all those insider trading investigations you barely escaped? The ones where the evidence mysteriously disappeared? Well, let's just say I learned a lot about hiding paper trails." A knock at the door interrupted us. Margaret Wells entered, carrying a thick folder. "The board is assembling for an emergency meeting," she announced, "and the SEC would like to verify the share transfers." "Everything's in order," I assured her, standing up. Alexander was just leaving, for good. He stood shakily. "You can't do this. I built this company." "No," I corrected him. "You inherited this company from your father, and then you merely ran it into the ground with your ego and short-sighted leadership. Now you can either leave quietly with a generous severance package, or I can have security escort you out while I read aloud from the file I keep on your creative accounting practices." The fight went out of him all at once. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office that had been his entire identity for so long. I looked at Margaret. "Shall we?" She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "The board is waiting, and they're terrified." "Good," I said, gathering my tablet. "They should be." The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 men and 1 woman, all wearing expressions ranging from shock to outrage to fear. Richard Cooper, our CFO, looked like he hadn't slept. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." "This is irregular." Thomas Wellington, our longest-serving board member, sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can and I have." I cut him off. "Now we can waste time arguing about it, or we can discuss the Peterson merger and our new direction for the Asian markets. Your choice." Richard Cooper cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the share transfers. They're legitimate. Ms. Barrett has been accumulating her position for years, all through legal channels." "Thank you, Richard," I said. "Now let's talk about the future. I've prepared a detailed presentation on our 5-year strategy." I pulled up the first slide, a comprehensive analysis of our market position that I'd spent years developing while sitting quietly in the corner of these same board meetings, officially just there to take notes. For the next 2 hours, I laid out my vision: expansion into emerging markets, investment in sustainable technologies, a complete overhaul of our corporate culture. By the time I finished, even Thomas Wellington had stopped protesting and started taking notes. One more thing, I said as the meeting wound down. Effective immediately, we're implementing a company-wide policy review. Pay equity, promotion practices, harassment policies. Everything. Margaret will be heading up the task force. That could be expensive, Richard cautioned. So is losing talent because we're stuck in the 1950s, I countered. Speaking of which, Janet Anderson from the mailroom has a master's in supply chain management. Promote her to operations immediately and find out who else we've been overlooking. As the board filed out, Margaret stayed behind. The Wall Street Journal wants an interview, she said, and Forbes is already talking about featuring you in their next issue. I shook my head. First things first, get me the personnel files for every administrative assistant, secretary, and support staff member in the company. I want to know who else has been hiding their light under a bushel. She smiled. Already done. There's a data analyst in accounting who's been working as a clerk for 3 years. PhD from MIT, and a former management consultant working in reception because she needed flexible hours for her kids. Promote them both, I said. And Margaret? Thank you for keeping my secret all these months. She shrugged. I knew something was coming when I traced those share purchases. I just didn't know what. Besides, it's about time someone shook up the boys' club. By the end of the week, Harrison and Price was transformed. Alexander's old guard was gone, replaced by a diverse team of leaders chosen for talent rather than connections. The Peterson merger was proceeding smoothly, with both companies' stock prices soaring. And me? I kept my old assistant's desk outside the CEO's office. Not to work at it, but as a reminder. Every morning when I walked past it, I thought about all the other just secretaries out there, watching and waiting for their moment. The following Monday, I called my first all-company meeting. Standing at the podium, looking out at thousands of faces, I thought about that night at the gala when Alexander had told me to know my place. For too long, I began, this company has wasted its most valuable resource, its people. We've overlooked talent because it didn't come in the package we expected. We've dismissed wisdom because it came from the wrong desk. That ends today. I paused, making eye contact with Janet from the mailroom, now wearing a crisp suit in her role as operations director. From now on, there is no just anything at Harrison and Price. No just secretaries. No just clerks. No just assistants. There are only people, talented, ambitious, worthy people. And if anyone tells you to know your place, remember this. Your place is wherever your talent and hard work can take you. The applause was deafening. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I found a gift on my desk. It was my old nameplate from when I was Alexander's secretary, but someone had modified it. Under my name, in elegant script, were the words, "Never just anything." I placed it on my desk, right next to my CEO nameplate. A reminder that power doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman sitting in the corner, taking notes, watching, waiting, and building an empire in silence. The next morning, the Wall Street Journal ran another story. Harrison and Price stock hits all-time high under new leadership. Below the headline was a photo of me at my old assistant's desk, now displayed prominently in my office. The caption read, Olivia Barrett, CEO, from taking notes to taking control. I smiled, remembering Alexander's words from the gala. Yes, I had gotten lucky, but luck had nothing to do with what came next. That was all strategy, patience, and the power of being underestimated. After all, I wasn't just a secretary who got lucky. I was a CEO who got smart. And this was only the beginning.